At the time of the Buddha, there were numerous sects of ascetics wandering the lands of ancient India and probably many other places too. Most of them have been described as kind of noisy and oftentimes as making a racket or sounding like a band of fishermen in the suttas. However, the Noble Sangha of the Buddha has pretty much always been described as fond of silence or simply as quiet. And if they were not silent, they have been heavily criticized by the Buddha. And he even left sometimes and refused to talk in such assemblies if they were not quiet. Today, we want to find out why we should emulate this principle and why the Buddha praised few practices as much as simply the practice of saying nothing at all or very little. Like normally, I want to start with a citation from the suttas, and it goes as follows. Now, on that occasion, Sakulut, Yin the wanderer, was sitting with a large following of wanderers who were shouting, making a shrill racket, a great racket, engaged in many kinds of bestial topics of conversation about kings, robbers, ministers of states, armies, alarms, and battles, food and drink, clothing, furniture, garlands and scents, relatives, vehicles, villages, towns, cities, the countryside, women and heroes, the gossip of the street and the well, tales of the dead, tales of diversity, the creation of the world and the sea, talk about whether things exist or not. Yin, the wanderer, saw the Blessed One coming from afar, and on seeing him, hushed his following. Be quiet, good sirs, don't make a sound. Here comes the contemplative Gautama. He is fond of quietude and speaks in praise of quietude. Maybe, if he perceives our group as quiet, he will consider it worth his while to come our way. So wanderers fell silent. This is from Majjhima Nikaya number 77. And as you can see, the Buddha was very fond of silence most of the time, and other wanderers at his time knew that. And I thought it would be nice to start with a snippet from the suttas that occurs a number of times in different shapes and forms. And as you can see, the Buddha and his Sangha of bhikkhus had a reputation of enjoying silence, and others very much knew about that. He had a reputation of that. Otherwise, such contemplatives or ascetics of his time did not know about that. And while I call this video Right Silence, it is obviously, and the experienced listener will know that, very much about the topic that is known nowadays as right speech. Yet, I find right silence even more fitting than right speech, as practicing even the 5 precepts rightly would lead to being silent most of the time, unless you have a job that requires you to talk a lot. But apart from that, there's not much talk going on. And by keeping that single precept alone, your behavior would be quite different from that of most worldly people. In fact, the vast majority of people, even if they are introverted, do communicate a lot, basically all the time even. Sometimes it's just via chatting and not via talking a lot on the phone or something like that. And yes, right silence also includes not chatting at all. It also includes all kinds of other channels of communication, no matter what they are. And as you might imagine, the way of the world includes a lot of communication at basically all times. Most people do not speak with a purpose. They are just chatting at any given opportunity. And that chatting does reinforce a sense of self. There's a lot of craving involved, if you want to call it like that. And the content of such talk might have changed a bit compared with the suttas, but the overall categories are more or less the same, as you might imagine by now. We could call it chariots back in the day, but today people are talking about cars, they are talking about sports and all other kinds of things. The point is, it's kind of meaningless talk. And by changing the world just a slight bit, or by inserting the names of real people, you will soon realize that basically nothing has changed since then. People still waste away their lives talking about politics, the latest fear of the month, and many other topics that they use to distract themselves from the unpleasant truths of their lives, from impermanence. And that kind is one of the main purposes of speech. But anyway, let us come back to the sutta. And there's another citation, why and how the Buddha defined right speech. And he said, right speech, what is it actually? Here, someone abandons lying when summoned to a court or to a meeting or to his relatives' presence or to the guild or to a royal family's presence and questioned as a witness thus. So, good man, tell what you know. Then, not knowing, he says, I do not know. Knowing, he says, I know. Not seeing, he says, I do not see. He says, I see. He does not, in full awareness, speak falsehood for his own ends or for another ends or for some petty worldly end. He abandons slander, as one who is neither a repeater elsewhere of what is heard here for the purpose of causing division from these, nor a repeater to these of what is heard elsewhere for the purpose of causing division of those, who is thus a reuniter of the divided, a promoter of friendship, enjoying concord, rejoicing in concord, delighting in concord. He becomes a speaker of words that promote concord. He abandons abuse. He becomes a speaker of such words that are innocent, pleasing to the ear, and lovable, as go to the heart, are civil, desired of many, and dear to many. He abandons gossip, as one who tells that which is seasonable, factual, good, and the Dhamma and discipline. He speaks at the right time, speech worth recording, which is reasoned, definite, and connected with good. And this is from Majjhima Nikaya number 41. As you can see, right speech or right silence actually includes a lot of things that you should actually abandon. It's much more about abandoning certain kinds of speech than it is about cultivating certain other kinds of speech. And as you will also notice in the sutta, it says that the speech should be agreeable to many, not to all. You can never be agreeable to everyone, simply because when people do not like you, they will find whatever you say disagreeable. But yeah, as you can say, right speech is much more about not speaking certain things than it is to speak the right things. You abandon unwholesome ways of speaking thus. He abandons false speech, abstaining therefrom by speaking truth, cleaving to truth. When he speaks, he is trustworthy, reliable, and undeceiving of the world. He abandons slander, abuse. He abandons gossip. He speaks in season, speaks worth recording, which is reasoned, definite, and in concord with good. Or in short, someone intent on their own good is simply silent most of the time and only speaks with Dhamma purpose, or if it necessary, to maintain his livelihood. That is a very, very important thing. People think that it is good to speak a lot to make others feel invited or something like that. But that is not necessarily true from the point of view of Dhamma. You can remain silent, even a lot of the time. You speak a bit of cordial talk, as the Buddha also did when someone approached him. And then you either speak on Dhamma or do not speak at all. Basically, you leave out everything that is not directly assisting your own liberation. Once you try that and have a rough understanding of wholesome, unwholesome, you will notice that basically 99% or more of all speech is simply unwholesome. For hours on end, we tend to speak rooted in greed, aversion, and distraction or delusion, no matter how you want to call it. We speak out of unwholesome intentions, even if the content of the speech seems innocent to the outside. The motivation, why we speak, is usually one that leads us away from liberation. And that is what unwholesome means. So, and why is speech so central? Why did the Buddha praise silence so much? Well, at one point, just to give you a few examples, he even disbanded a Sangha, a group of his followers, because they were speaking too much. He laid out special rules for new monks so that they should speak little. That was one of the most important things that new monks should abide by. And all precepts contain rules on speech, put limits on your speech. You should not speak all the time. You should only speak certain things. And he even called talk a hindrance for a sotapanna in a number of suttas, like from the Book of the Threes to the Book of the Sixes in the Anguttara Nikaya. There is a lot of talk about not talking too much and not working too much and not sleeping too much. Basically, most of your attention should be directed at the Dhamma, and certain activities hinder you from doing that. So it is a hindrance for a sotapanna or higher. And it's even called a thorn in the jhanas, because it could be more quiet. You could be more focused on Dhamma. And noise, and especially the talk of other people, will hinder you from doing that. And especially will hinder you from entering the second jhana, which is sometimes called noble silence. And there are many more topics around speech when it comes to the suttas. So it is really a central paradigm. And one could even say that you cannot speak in the first jhana. You can no longer break into speech. That is also one very central element that is repeated quite often in a number of suttas, like Majjhima Nikaya, number 43 and 44, I think, and many others. And from a modern point of view, just to approach it from a different angle, humans are social animals, and speech is our tool for that. The urge to speak and socialize is among the strongest passions that we have, as it is directly related to our survival and very much necessary to procreate. And giving up false speech also means giving up a lot of our perceived safety, because speech ensures that others will like us, that others will receive us well, and that they will also protect us if we have succeeded in making them like ourselves. So it's very important for basically any social animal. And in a sense, speech is our tool that connects our internal or thinking world with the external world outside. And the natural mode of being as a human would be that we think, that we speak our thoughts into the world outside. That is what connects our mind with the physical world outside. And thus speech is a central piece of rope that ties us to the world of the senses, or to sensuality, which is basically the same thing. And with basically every word that we speak, we refresh our connection with the sensual domain, and as such we cannot really enter jhana, as an example, which is secluded, quite thoroughly secluded from the sensual domain. And that is kind of necessary. Sensuality requires constant maintenance through actions, words, and mental activity. So at least the words must cease. And if we stop speaking for a while, we would inevitably notice the disconnect between thought and speech. The body is kind of doing the speaking for ourselves. And there can be thoughts without speech. They are not bubbling out of our mouths randomly or something like that. There is a sankhara, a condition for speaking. And our attention automatically turns inwards when we practice silence, as we do not refresh the sensual connection anymore. If we cease the action of speaking, then, well, we will notice the divide. As a result, the connection grows weaker, and to an untrained mind, it can feel like we are losing ourselves even. The mind would even feel like floating away from the body sometimes. And most people are deeply uncomfortable when not talking, especially the extroverts, who derive a lot of safety from speaking all the time. Introverts usually simply found a different way to maintain that connection, and they still speak a lot. They chat a lot, as an example. It is just that they do not thrive in the presence of other people. But they do speak with others from time to time too, simply because they need that too. It is a very deeply rooted urge, a very deeply rooted passion. And all of this is why the Buddha called talking a thorn in the jhana. It is both about silence around you and silencing your own mouth. Once you do that, and based on prior training concerning your actions, jhana can arise. The suttas even say that you cannot speak in jhana, as that would reconnect you with the sensual domain, even if the hindrances remain surmounted. Speech, and even things that, like work, still require a certain, level of activity that is at least related to the senses, and as such, it is not as calm as it could be. Yet with nearly all things, you can also overdo it. The Buddha did criticize forest-dwelling bhikkhus without right view, who spend their times away from the Sangha, which is a source of wisdom and instructions. He encouraged people to ask questions to advanced practitioners from time to time to clear up doubt and perplexing points. He did even praise advanced monks for discussions on the Dhamma on maybe one evening every few days on some occasions. Speech can surely speed up your progress by offering new perspectives and inspiration, but it should remain within strict limits. Speech should be a tool for Dhamma and not a tool for sensuality. It's a bit like the internet. You can use it both for good and bad things. You can waste away your life on YouTube or TikTok or any of the other favorite of the month apps nowadays, but you can also use it to learn about Dhamma, even though you can also overdo that and spend way too much time looking at such videos. But anyway, this should be enough for today. Let us now come to the most important points. We basically speak all the time and maintain our ignorance, or avidya, through that. Thus the Buddha was fond of silence and placed limits on speech whenever he could, because people tend, if they are left to their nature, to speak a lot, pretty much all the time. And if you have to speak, only speak purposefully, preferably on the Dhamma. And basically everything else, every talk that is not directly related to Dhamma, is kinda unwholesome, at least depending on your progress. The more progressed you become, the more advanced you become, the better it is to remain silent most of the time. Practicing right speech will inevitably lead to silence most of the time. If you only speak for Dhamma purposes, you might even be silent for days on end and kind of unlearn speaking to a degree, which is something that some people tend to joke about on the internet. But anyway, this should be enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoy what I do, feel free to like and subscribe and do all the other YouTube stuff. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and